Mafia boss invites the shy waitress to play chess for fun. Little did he know, she was a genius. The rain in Port Azure did not wash the city clean. It simply made the grime on the pavement shine under the amber glow of streetlights. It was 3 a.m, the hour when the city held its breath, caught between the sins of the night and the repentance of the morning. Lorenzo Marconi pushed open the glass door of the Silver Spoon Diner, a bell jingling softly overhead to announce his arrival. The air inside smelled of frying bacon, stale coffee, and floor wax. It was a scent that grounded him. Lorenzo was a man who spent his days in boardrooms that cost more than this entire city block, and his nights in warehouses deciding the fate of men who had crossed him. He wore a suit tailored in Milan, charcoal gray and immaculate, which stood in stark contrast to the cracked vinyl of the corner booth he claimed as his own. The diner was nearly empty. An elderly trucker snored softly over a slice of pie 2 booths down, and the cook was scraping the grill in the back, the rhythmic metal-on-metal sound serving as a backdrop to the silence. Lorenzo sat, sliding a small wooden box onto the table. He opened it, revealing a hand-carved chessboard. It was his ritual. After the noise of the business, the shouting, the negotiations, the violence, he needed the silent logic of the board. Here, the rules were clear. Kings died, queens sacrificed themselves, and pawns marched forward. There was no betrayal in chess, only strategy. He began to set up the pieces, the white ivory smooth against his calloused fingertips. "Coffee, sir." The voice was barely a whisper. Lorenzo looked up, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. He did not recognize the waitress. She was new. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with chestnut hair pulled back into a messy bun that seemed to be unraveling by the second. Her uniform was a size too big, swallowing her slender frame. "Black," Lorenzo said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the table. "And leave the pot." "Yes, sir." She did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed firmly on the linoleum floor. As she reached out to place the ceramic mug on the table, her sleeve rode up slightly. Lorenzo froze. On the inside of her wrist, blooming like a dark violet against her pale skin, was a bruise. It was the shape of a thumbprint, fresh. She saw him looking and yanked her sleeve down, her hand trembling so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching for a napkin. "I will clean that up. I'm so clumsy." "Leave it," Lorenzo said. His tone was not harsh, but it carried the weight of command. She froze, the napkin hovering in her hand. He studied her. She was like a bird that had flown into a glass window, stunned, fragile, and terrified of the next impact. He had seen fear in many eyes, but this was different. This was exhaustion. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ava," she breathed. "Ava Benton. Ava," Lorenzo repeated, testing the weight of it. He gestured to the empty bench across from him. "Sit down." Her eyes widened, panic flashing in them. "I cannot, sir. My manager, he will—" "Your manager is currently asleep in the office," Lorenzo said, glancing toward the back room where the faint sound of a television could be heard. "And if he wakes up, he will not mind. Sit." Ava hesitated, looking from the kitchen to the booth, slowly, as if expecting the seat to bite her. She slid into the booth opposite him. She sat on the very edge, ready to bolt. Lorenzo finished setting up the black pieces. He turned the board so the white pieces faced her. "Do you play?" he asked. Ava blinked, looking down at the board. Her eyes traced the lines of the squares, the formation of the knights and bishops. For a second, the fear in her posture vanished, replaced by a flicker of recognition. "A little," she murmured. "I used to—" "Good," Lorenzo said. "I need a distraction. If you beat me, I will tip you $1,000. If I win, you refill my coffee for free." Ava looked up at him then, truly looked at him for the first time. He saw intelligence behind the fear, a sharp, calculating mind that was currently buried under layers of trauma. "You do not have to do that," she said. "Play," Lorenzo commanded softly. He moved his pawn to E4, standard opening, aggressive but flexible. Ava stared at the board. Her hand hovered over the pieces. Her fingers were long and slender, scarred by small burns and cuts from kitchen work. She moved her pawn to e5. Lorenzo countered. He played fast, a style that usually intimidated his opponents. He moved his knight, attacking the center. He expected her to falter, to make a mistake out of nervousness. She did not. Ava moved her knight to c6. Her hand was no longer trembling. Her breathing had steadied. Her eyes darted across the board, processing lines of attack that had not even occurred to him yet. Lorenzo leaned forward, intrigued. He developed his bishop, aiming for a classic Italian game structure. He wanted to test her defenses. Ava ignored his bishop. She pushed a pawn, opening a diagonal for her queen. It looked like a mistake, a reckless opening of her king's side. Lorenzo smirked internally. He took the pawn. 3 moves later, his smirk vanished. She had not made a mistake. She had set a trap by taking the pawn. He had overextended his knight, leaving his center undefended. Ava moved her bishop, pinning his knight to his queen. Lorenzo paused. The sounds of the diner faded away. There was only the board. He looked at the position, really looked at it, and realized he was in trouble. He tried to castle, to bring his king to safety. Ava sacrificed her bishop. It was a stunning move. She took a pawn protecting his king, losing her piece but shattering his defensive wall. Lorenzo stared at her. She was chewing on her bottom lip, her brow furrowed in concentration. She did not look like a shy waitress anymore. She looked like a general. "Check," she whispered. Sliding her queen into position, Lorenzo blocked with a rook. "Check," she said again, bringing her knight into the fray. He moved his king. "Checkmate." Lorenzo stared at the board. The black king was trapped in the corner, hemmed in by his own pawns and her relentless queen. He counted the moves in his head. 15. She had destroyed him in 15 moves. Silence hung heavy in the booth. Ava seemed to snap out of a trance. She looked at the board, then at Lorenzo, and the color drained from her face. She stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, wringing her hands. "I did not mean to. Lorenzo began to laugh. It was a low, gravelly sound that surprised even him. He had not laughed in months. "Sit down, Ava," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a money clip, and counted out 10 $100 bills. He slid them across the table. "I cannot take that," she whispered, staring at the money as if it were cursed. "A deal is a deal," Lorenzo said. "You have a gift. Where did you learn to play like that?" "My father," she said quietly. "He taught me before he passed." Lorenzo nodded, respecting the grief in her voice. He did not press. "Tomorrow night," he said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Same time, rematch." "I work tomorrow night," she said. "I know." Lorenzo replied, "I will see you then." The ritual continued for a week, every night at 3. Lorenzo would enter the silver spoon. Ava would have the table ready, the board set up, and his coffee waiting. They did not speak much at first. Chess was their language. Lorenzo was a brilliant strategist. He ran a criminal empire that spanned the entire eastern seaboard. But Ava possessed a raw, intuitive genius that defied logic. She played with a chaotic beauty, taking risks that no sane person would take, and somehow making them land. Lorenzo won a few games, mostly by capitalizing on her exhaustion, but she won the majority, slowly. The silence between moves began to fill with words. "You look tired tonight," Lorenzo observed one Tuesday, moving his rook. Ava shrugged, wiping a table as she waited for him to move. "Double shift," one of the girls called out. "You work too much," Lorenzo said. "Rent does not pay itself," she countered, capturing his pawn. "What did you want to do?" Lorenzo asked. "Before the diner." Ava paused. She held a white bishop in her hand, rolling it between her fingers. "I was studying mathematics," she said softly. "I wanted to play professionally. Chess. I had a scholarship." "What happened?" "My father got sick," she said, her voice tight. "The medical bills were astronomical. I dropped out of work. Then he died, and the debts were still there. So, here I am." Lorenzo watched her. He saw the shame she tried to hide, the burden of a life that had forced her into a corner. He felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, not at her, but at the world that crushed brilliance like hers for the sake of a few dollars. Debts can be managed, Lorenzo said carefully. Not these kinds of debts, Ava muttered, placing the bishop back on the board. Check. Lorenzo lost that game, too, but his mind was no longer on chess. The next day, Lorenzo made a phone call. It took his network less than an hour to find the information. Ava Benton owed $40,000 to a loan shark named Ray Corgan. Lorenzo knew Ray. He was a bottom feeder, a man who preyed on the desperate and the weak. He ran a small operation out of a boxing gym in the crumbling south side of the city. More importantly, Ray paid tribute to the Varelli family, Lorenzo's only real rivals in Port-Azur. Lorenzo sat in his office, staring at the file on his desk. Ray Corgan. He could have Ray killed with a single word. He could have the debt wiped clean before lunch. But Lorenzo was a strategist. If he acted too forcefully, he would tip his hand. He would expose Ava as something valuable to him. And in his world, value made you a target. He had to be careful. That night, the atmosphere in the diner was tense. Ava was jumpy. She dropped a fork, startling herself so badly she nearly cried. When she poured Lorenzo's coffee, he saw fresh red marks on her upper arm, distinct finger-shaped bruises where someone had grabbed her with crushing force. Lorenzo's grip on his coffee cup tightened until the ceramic threatened to crack. "Who touched you?" he asked. His voice was low, deadly quiet. Ava flinched. "Nobody. I bumped into a door." "Ava," Lorenzo said. He did not shout, but the authority in his voice made her stop. "Do not lie to me. Was it Ray?" Ava went still. She looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. "How do you know that name?" "It is my business to know things," Lorenzo said. "Did he hurt you?" "He came to the back alley," she whispered, looking toward the kitchen as if Ray might burst through the swing doors. "He said I was late on the interest. He said next time he would break my fingers so I could not carry plates anymore." Lorenzo felt a cold rage settle over him. To threaten a woman was cowardly. To threaten the hands of an artist was a sin. "He will not touch you again," Lorenzo said. "You do not understand," Ava said, tears pooling in her eyes. "He is connected. Dangerous people. If I do not pay, I am a dangerous person," Lorenzo said, and he stood up. The game was forgotten. "Get your coat. I am walking you home." "I cannot leave. My shift is not over for another hour," she protested. Lorenzo walked to the counter, pulled out a $100 bill, and slapped it down in front of the bewildered night manager. "She is leaving. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the Marconi family." The manager went pale and nodded frantically. The rain had turned into a deluge. Lorenzo opened a large black umbrella, holding it over Ava as they stepped into the night. The city was dark, shadows stretching long and twisted across the wet concrete. They walked in silence for a few blocks. Ava stayed close to him, not out of affection but out of fear of the dark. Lorenzo adjusted his pace to hers. He scanned every alley, every parked car, his instincts sharp. "Why are you doing this?" Ava asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You are a rich man. I am just nobody." "You are not nobody," Lorenzo said, "and I detest bullies." "He is following me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I feel him watching me. Sometimes I see his car parked down the street from my apartment." Lorenzo stopped. He turned to her. Under the shelter of the umbrella, they were inches apart. He looked down at her, seeing the exhaustion and the fear, but also the resilience. "Listen to me," Lorenzo said, his voice firm. "You are under my protection now. Ray Corgan is a pawn. He thinks he is a king, but he is nothing. Do you understand?" Ava looked up at him. For the first time, she did not look away. She searched his eyes, looking for the lie, but she found only steel. "I do not have money to pay you for protection," she said. Lorenzo almost smiled. "I do not want your money. Ava, I want you to beat me at chess again tomorrow night." They reached her apartment building. It was a run-down brick structure with a flickering light above the entrance. Lorenzo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek, black phone. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. It has one number programmed in it, mine. If you see Ray, if you see anyone suspicious, if you even feel afraid, you call day or night. Ava took the phone, her fingers brushing against his palm. Her skin was cold. Lorenzo reached into his other pocket. He pulled out a chess piece, a black knight, hand-carved from obsidian. It was heavy, cool to the touch. Keep this, he said. A reminder. The knight is the only piece that can jump over obstacles. It does not move in a straight line. It finds a way around. Ava took the knight. She clutched it tightly in her hand, holding it like a talisman. Thank you, she whispered. Go inside, Lorenzo said. Lock the door. He watched her unlock the heavy metal door and slip inside. He did not leave immediately. He stood in the rain, watching her third-floor window. A moment later, a light flickered on. Lorenzo pulled out his own phone and dialed a number. Boss, a voice answered instantly. I want 2 men on 4th and Elm, Lorenzo said. 24 hours a day, invisible. If Ray Corgan or any of his crew come within a block of this building, break their legs, but do not let the girls see you. Understood, boss. Lorenzo hung up. He looked up at the window one last time, inside the small, barely lit apartment. Ava stood by the window. She did not turn on the main light, keeping the room in the shadows. She peeled back the curtain just an inch, looking down at the street. The dark figure of Lorenzo was walking away, fading into the rain and the night. Ava looked down at her hand. In her palm lay the black knight, smooth and dark. She ran her thumb over the horse's carved mane. For the first time in years, the crushing weight in her chest felt a little lighter. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was in the game. The alley behind the Silver Spoon Diner smelled of wet cardboard and stale grease, a scent that clung to the brick walls like a second skin. Ava hated taking the trash out after midnight, but the dishwasher had walked out mid-shift, leaving her with the heavy lifting. She heaved a black bag into the dumpster, the metal lid clanging shut with a sound that echoed too loudly in the narrow space. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to go back inside, but the path was blocked. Ray Corgan leaned against the door frame, picking his teeth with a matchstick. He wore a cheap leather jacket that squeaked when he moved, and his eyes were glassy, shifting with a predatory glint. Working late, Ava, Ray said, stepping forward. The single bulb above the back door flickered, casting his shadow long and distorted against the pavement. I do not have your money, Ray, Ava said, her voice trembling but her chin held high. I get paid on Friday. Friday is too late, Ray spat. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He smelled of cheap whiskey and old sweat. The interest went up. You know how this works. You miss a day, the price doubles. That is illegal, Ava said, backing up until her spine hit the cold metal of the dumpster. Ray laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Illegal? Sweetheart, look around. Who are you going to call? The police. He lunged, grabbing her upper arm. His fingers dug into the bruise he had left the week before. Ava gasped, pain shooting up her shoulder. Panic flared white-hot in her chest, but beneath the fear, something cold and logical snapped into place, the same part of her brain that saw checkmates 3 moves ahead. Ray was heavy, leaning his weight on his right leg. He was arrogant, expecting her to cower. Instead of pulling away, Ava stepped into him. She drove her heel down hard onto his instep. Ray howled, his grip loosening just enough. Ava shoved him with both hands, putting every ounce of her fear and frustration into the push. Ray stumbled back, slipping on the wet pavement. He caught himself against the brick wall, his face twisting from shock to fury. You little witch, he snarled, straightening up. He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying second, Ava thought he was pulling a weapon, but he stopped, his eyes darting to the street entrance of the alley where headlights swept past. You are making a mistake, Ray hissed, pointing a shaking finger at her. You think you are tough. Wait until my friends pay you a visit. You will be begging to pay me. He spat on the ground near her feet, turned, and vanished into the shadows of the alley, leaving Ava shaking against the dumpster, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Lorenzo found out, An hour later. He did not come to the diner. Instead, a black sedan idled by the curb as Ava finished her shift. One of the men Lorenzo had posted to watch her, a towering figure named Marcus, opened the rear door as she walked out. "Mr. Marconi wants to see you," Marcus said gently. Ava got in. The interior was warm, smelling of leather and cedar. Lorenzo sat in the shadows, his face unreadable. As soon as the door clicked shut, he reached out and took her hand, turning it over to inspect her wrist. Fresh red marks bloomed over the old purple ones. The temperature in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He touched you," Lorenzo said. It was not a question. His voice was terrifyingly calm, void of any inflection, which made it infinitely worse than if he had shouted. "I fought back," Ava whispered, a strange mix of shame and pride in her voice. "I stepped on his foot. I pushed him." Lorenzo looked at her, and the ice in his eyes fractured for a moment, replaced by a fierce, burning approval. "Good," he murmured, "but you should never have had to." He tapped on the partition glass. "Marcus, boss? Find Ray Corgan," Lorenzo ordered. "Do not kill him, not yet. We need to know who is holding his leash, but I want you to deliver a message. Break his right hand. Make sure he cannot hold a pen to write down a debt, or a match to light a cigarette, for a very long time. Understood?" Ava felt a shiver run through her. She knew she should be horrified by the violence, by the casual way Lorenzo ordered a man maimed, but looking at her bruised wrist, she felt only a grim, dark sense of safety. "Where are we going?" she asked as the car pulled away from the curb. "Somewhere safe," Lorenzo replied. "You are not staying at your apartment tonight." The Onyx Club was a fortress of luxury disguised as a nightlife venue. The car bypassed the long line of people waiting at the velvet rope and drove directly into a private underground garage. Lorenzo guided Ava into a private elevator that whisked them up to the top floor. The doors opened into a private room that looked more like a library than a club. Walls lined with dark mahogany bookshelves, a fireplace crackling with birch logs, and thick Persian rugs that swallowed the sound of their footsteps. The chaos of the city felt a million miles away. Ava stood in the center of the room, clutching her worn purse, feeling painfully out of place in her diner uniform and scuffed sneakers. "Relax, Ava," Lorenzo said, walking to a sideboard and uncorking a bottle of dark red wine. "No one can hurt you here. This floor is impenetrable." He poured 2 glasses and brought one to her. Her fingers brushed his as she took the stem, and she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. "I have something for you," Lorenzo said. He set his glass down and opened a drawer in the heavy oak desk. He pulled out a small, black object and placed it on the velvet blotter, a pistol. It was small, compact, and deadly looking. Ava took a step back. I do not like guns." "I do not ask you to like it," Lorenzo said, his voice firm. "I ask you to respect it, and I ask you to learn how to use it, just in case." He picked up the weapon, checked the safety, and held it out to her handle. "First, take it." Hesitantly, Ava reached out. The metal was heavy and cold. It felt alien in her hand. "It is too heavy," she whispered. "Adjust your grip," Lorenzo said. He moved behind her. Ava's breath hitched. He was close, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest against her back. He reached around her, his large hands covering hers, correcting her grip. "Thumbs forward," he murmured, his voice vibrating near her ear. "Do not cross them behind the slide, or it will bite you. Keep your elbows bent slightly, like this." He guided her arms up, aiming at the fireplace mantel. Ava tried to focus on the mechanics, on the safety catch and the sight alignment, but her senses were overwhelmed by him. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and rain, filled her nose. His hands were rough, calloused from years of hard decisions, yet his touch on her skin was incredibly gentle. She did not pull away. She leaned back, just a fraction of an inch, resting against him. For a moment, the gun was forgotten. There was only the slow, heavy beat of her heart and the solid wall of his presence protecting her. "You are a natural," Lorenzo said softly, his chin brushing the top of her head. Steady hands, just like on the chessboard. He slowly released her and stepped back. The loss of his warmth was immediate and jarring. Ava lowered the gun, engaging the safety as he had shown her, and placed it back on the desk with trembling fingers. They sat on the leather sofa near the fire, the bottle of wine half empty between them. The adrenaline of the evening had faded into a melancholy exhaustion. "Tell me," Lorenzo said, watching the firelight dance in his glass. "You said your father died. What about your mother?" Ava looked into her wine, swirling the crimson liquid. "She left when I was 16, she said quietly. "She packed a suitcase while I was at school. When I came home, there was a note on the fridge. It said she couldn't handle the sickness anymore. My father had just been diagnosed. She didn't want to be a nurse. She wanted to be free." Lorenzo went still. "She left a child to care for a dying man alone? I was not a child," Ava said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "I grew up that day. I realized that people stay only as long as it is convenient. When the game gets hard, most people forfeit." Lorenzo set his glass down. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "Not everyone forfeits, Ava." He brushed his thumb across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. His touch was reverence, a silent promise against the cruelty of her past. Ava turned her face into his palm, closing her eyes. She felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, gratitude, safety, and something deeper, something terrifyingly like love. She opened her eyes and looked at him. The fierce Mafia boss was gone. In his place was a man who looked at her as if she were the only source of light in a dark room. She leaned in. It was instinct. She pressed her lips softly against his. Lorenzo froze for a heartbeat. Then he kissed her back. It was a soft, testing kiss, tasting of wine and longing. Ava made a small sound in her throat and deepened it, her hand coming up to grip the lapel of his jacket. The kiss grew heavier. Lorenzo groaned low in his throat, his hand sliding into her hair, tilting her head back. For a moment, the fire in the hearth seemed to jump into their veins. Then, Lorenzo pulled back. He was breathing hard, his eyes dark and dilated. He gently disentangled her fingers from his jacket. "Ava," he rasped. "Stop. Did I do something wrong?" she whispered, mortified. "No," Lorenzo said firmly. He took her hands and kissed her knuckles, one by one. "You did everything right, but you are vulnerable tonight. You are scared, and you have had wine, and I will not take advantage of that. When this happens between us, and it will happen, it will be because you want me, not because you need a savior." Ava stared at him, stunned by his honor. In a world of men who took whatever they could grab, Lorenzo Marconi was playing by a different set of rules. The reality of their war crashed back in the next morning. When Ava arrived at the Silver Spoon for the morning shift, police tape blocked the door. The front window, the one next to their chess booth, was shattered. Red spray paint dripped down the brick facade. "Pay the toll, Ava stood on the sidewalk, glass crunching under her shoes. She felt sick. This was her fault. She had brought this darkness to the one place that had given her a job. Lorenzo's SUV pulled up seconds later. He stepped out, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not look at the damage, he looked at her. "I caused this," Ava said, her voice breaking. "Ray. He did this because of me. Ray did this because he is a fool who signed his own death warrant," Lorenzo said. He placed a hand on her shoulder, turning her away from the wreckage. "This is not on you, Ava. This is my city. Vandalism in my territory is an insult to my family. This is my war now." He drove her to his office, a sleek, modern building in the financial district that served as the front for his legitimate enterprises. He sat her in the corner of his boardroom while he paced, barking orders into his phone. "I want the supply routes checked," he snapped at his consigliere, a gray-haired man named Silvio who looked at Ava with thinly veiled suspicion. "Varelli is squeezing the docks. He's using Ray as a distraction while he moves product through the South Channel." Ava looked up. She had been listening. "He's not moving through the South," she said. The room went silent. Silvio frowned. "Excuse me, miss?" "The South Channel," Ava said, her voice gaining strength as she pictured the map of the city in her mind like a grid. It is too obvious. It is the center of the board. If he is using Ray, a pawn, to cause chaos at the diner here, she pointed to a map on the wall. He is drawing your attention to the west. He's feinting. He will move his real pieces along the edge of the board. She stood up and walked to the map. Here, the old industrial train yards on the east side. They are unguarded because they are technically abandoned. That is his flank. Lorenzo stared at the map, then at Ava. He looked at Silvio. Check the train yards. Boss, that's a long shot, Silvio protested. Check it, Lorenzo ordered. 2 hours later, the call came in. Lorenzo's men had intercepted a massive shipment of contraband electronics and weapons at the east side rail yards. Ava had been right. Lorenzo looked at her across the polished mahogany table. He wasn't just looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a partner. You cannot go back to your apartment, Lorenzo said that evening. It is compromised, and the diner is closed for repairs. I have nowhere else, Ava said. You have me. Lorenzo replied. He took her to his estate. It was a sprawling mansion on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, surrounded by high walls and patrolled by armed guards. It was beautiful, intimidating, and lonely. They ate dinner in a dining room that could seat 30 people. Afterward, Lorenzo invited her for a walk. The air was cool, smelling of salt spray and the thousands of roses that bloomed in the moonlit garden. They walked along the stone path, the gravel crunching softly underfoot. The tension that had been building between them for days, the chess games, the danger, the gun lesson, the strategy session, felt like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. You amaze me, Ava, Lorenzo said, stopping near a high stone wall covered in climbing ivy. Most people run from this life. You looked at it and solved it like a puzzle. I'm tired of running, Ava admitted. She looked up at him, the moonlight catching the curve of her neck. And I am tired of being afraid. You are safe here, Lorenzo said. He stepped closer. It is not just the safety I want, Ava whispered. She reached out and took hold of his tie. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear of overstepping. She pulled him down to her. Lorenzo did not hold back. He groaned, a sound of surrender, and crushed his mouth to hers. This was not the gentle kiss of the night before. This was hunger. It was possession. He backed her up until her shoulders hit the cool stone of the garden wall. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, gripping her waist, sliding down to cup her hips and pull her flush against him. Ava gasped into his mouth, her hands tangling in his thick hair, pulling him closer, deeper. She felt the hard lines of his body, the power he held in check, unleashed now only for her. He kissed her jaw, her throat, his stubble grazing her sensitive skin, sending shivers racing down her spine. Lorenzo, she breathed, her head falling back against the ivy. I have wanted to do this since the moment you beat me in 15 moves. He growled against her neck. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her as easily as if she were a chess piece. He carried her through the garden doors, down the hallway, and into his private study. He did not make it to the bedroom. He lowered her onto the velvet couch, his body covering hers, shielding her, claiming her. They lay tangled together, breathless, hearts hammering in unison against their ribs. Lorenzo buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent, while Ava held him tight, her fingers tracing the muscles of his back through his shirt. Outside, the guards patrolled the perimeter, and in the city below, the war was heating up. But in this room, in the quiet dark, the king and the queen had finally found their square. In Port Azur, secrets were a currency more valuable than gold, and inflation was hitting the market. The whisper that Lorenzo Marconi had taken in astray, a civilian, a woman with no blood ties to the families, traveled through the city's underbelly like a fever. It moved from the back rooms of cigar bars to the loading docks, eventually reaching the ears of those who wished Lorenzo dead. To the common street thug, it looked like a weakness. To Enzo Varelli, the head of the rival family controlling the western districts, it looked like an opportunity. Varelli was a man of brute force disguised as a businessman, and he knew that a man like Lorenzo, who usually operated with the cold precision of a machine, was vulnerable only when he found something he refused to sacrifice. Inside Lorenzo's own organization, the mood was tense. Silvio, his consigliere for over 20 years, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of Lorenzo's office, watching the city lights flicker below. "You are breaking protocol, Lorenzo," Silvio said, his voice gravelly and tired. "She is a civilian. She has debts. She has a tail. Bringing her into the estate wasn't just charity. It was a declaration. You have put a target on her back, and by extension on ours." Lorenzo sat behind his desk, studying a map of the city, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of the way Ava had looked at the garden wall the night before, the way she had unraveled in his arms. "She is not a civilian anymore," Lorenzo said, his tone final. "She is an asset." "She spotted the rail yard faint when none of you did. She is a waitress who plays chess," Silvio countered sharply. "She's not built for this world. When the bullets start flying, she will break. And if she breaks, she might take you down with her." Lorenzo looked up, his eyes cold. "Then I will make sure the bullets do not reach her." Ava felt the weight of her presence in the house. She saw it in the side-eyed glances of the maids, in the stiff posture of the guards who watched her every move. She was an intruder in a fortress built on blood and silence. The conversation she had overheard between Lorenzo and Silvio earlier that afternoon replayed in her mind. She will break. She sat on the edge of the massive four-poster bed in the guest suite, her hands trembling. She was putting him in danger. Ray was out there, likely answering to someone even worse, and by staying here, she was drawing that darkness to Lorenzo's doorstep. She loved him, the realization terrified her, but she could not be the reason his empire fell. It was just past midnight when she made her decision. She packed a single tote bag with her old uniform and the few clothes she had brought. She wrote a note on the heavy stationer's bond paper on the desk. "I cannot let you lose everything for me. Thank you for saving me." She slipped out the servants' entrance. The night shift guards were patrolling the perimeter wall, leaving the side gate momentarily unobserved during the rotation. It was a gap in security she had noticed 2 days ago, a chess player's habit of seeing the empty squares. She walked 3 miles in the drizzling rain to the nearest bus stop on the highway leading out of Port Azure. The shelter was a cracked plastic casing illuminated by a flickering halogen bulb. She sat on the bench, shivering, clutching her bag to her chest. A bus was due in 10 minutes. It would take her north, far away from the mobs and the violence. Headlights swept across the wet pavement, blinding her. A car screeched to a halt right in front of the bus stop. It wasn't a bus. It was a sleek black sedan. Lorenzo got out. He didn't look like a Mafia don at that moment. He looked like a man possessed. He wore no coat, the rain soaking his dress shirt instantly. He stormed into the shelter, his chest heaving. Ava stood up, backing away. "Lorenzo, please, go back." "You left," he said. His voice was raw, cracking with an emotion she had never heard from him. "You left a note." "I am a liability," she cried, the tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Silvio was right. I do not belong in your world. I am just a waitress. I am going to get you killed." Lorenzo stepped forward and grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising in its intensity. He shook her, just once, desperate to make her understand. "Do you think I care about the world?" he shouted over the sound of the rain. "Do you think I care about the empire? The money? The territory? I built all of that so I could have the power to choose my life, and I choose you." "You cannot," she sobbed. "I am weak." "You are the strongest person I know," Lorenzo said, dropping his voice to a fierce whisper. He framed her face with his wet hands, forcing her to look at him. "I have killed men for less than the disrespect of leaving me, Ava. But I do not want to control you. I want to protect you. I protect who I care about. Do not ask me to walk away from the best thing that has ever happened to me." Ava looked into his eyes, dark, desperate, and completely honest. The bus rumbled in the distance, its lights cutting through the fog, but she didn't look at it. She dropped her bag. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Lorenzo exhaled, a sound like a man surfacing for air. He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. He buried his face in her wet hair. Never do that again. They returned to his penthouse in the city, deciding the estate was too crowded with prying eyes for the conversation they needed to have. The apartment was quiet. Suspended high above the city lights, Lorenzo made tea, something domestic and simple that felt at odds with the gun holstered on the table. They sat on the floor by the fireplace, the chessboard between them. It was their anchor. When words failed, they had the pieces. "Show me," Lorenzo said softly. "Show me how you think." Ava moved the white pieces. She set up a complicated mid-game scenario. "This is called the Queen's Sacrifice," she explained, her voice steadying as she fell into the logic of the game. "Most players protect the queen at all costs. She's the most powerful piece. Losing her feels like dying." She moved the white queen directly into the path of a black rook. Lorenzo frowned. "That is suicide. You lose your power." "Watch," Ava said. Lorenzo took the queen with his rook. But in doing so, he opened a line of sight for Ava's bishop. She moved the bishop, then a knight. 2 moves later, Lorenzo's king was checkmated, trapped by the very pieces he had used to kill her queen. Lorenzo stared at the board. He traced the path of the pieces with his eyes. "You gave up everything to win." "Sometimes," Ava said, looking up at him, "you have to sacrifice the piece you love the most to save the game. It is about trusting that the other pieces will finish what she started." Lorenzo looked at her, and the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just teaching him chess. She was telling him that she was willing to lose herself if it meant he survived. He reached across the board, knocking over the kings and queens, and pulled her into his lap. He didn't kiss her. He just held her, his face buried in her neck, breathing her in. He was floored by the magnitude of her courage. Across the city, in a smoky back room of a warehouse, Ray Corgan stood shaking before Enzo Varelli. Ray's hand was in a cast, a reminder of Lorenzo's earlier warning, and his face was a map of bruises. Enzo Varelli was a small man with eyes like a shark, flat and dead. He cleaned his fingernails with a knife. "Lorenzo has taken the bait," Enzo said smoothly. "He's distracted. He's playing house with the waitress." "She's not just a waitress," Ray stammered. "She is smart. She fights back." "She is a tool," Enzo corrected, "and we are going to use her to pry Lorenzo's empire apart." He stood up and walked over to Ray, placing a heavy hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Bring her to me. Tonight, but Ray, bring her alive. If she dies before I can use her to trade for the waterfront territories, I will peel the skin from your bones." Ray swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Varelli." The next evening, Ava stood in front of the full-length mirror in Lorenzo's bedroom. On the bed lay a box from a high-end boutique, the tissue paper pushed aside. She wore the dress he had bought for her, a slip of emerald green silk that clung to her curves like water. It was backless, daring, and elegant. She applied a coat of red lipstick, her hands steady. She was done hiding. If she was going to be in this world, she would dress the part. She would be the queen, not the pawn. She walked into Lorenzo's study. He was on the phone, his back to the door, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He turned as he heard her enter, and the phone slowly lowered from his ear. He ended the call without looking away from her. "Ava," he breathed. "I am tired of the uniform," she said, walking toward him. The silk swished softly against her legs. Lorenzo met her halfway. He didn't touch her at first. He just looked, his eyes devouring her. "You look dangerous." "Good," she said. She stepped into his space, placing her hands on his chest. The heat between them was instantaneous, a spark hitting gasoline. Lorenzo groaned, his restraint shattering. He grabbed her waist and hoisted her up, backing her against his heavy oak desk. He kissed her, and it wasn't gentle. It was a hungry, desperate collision. It was a claim. Ava wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer, her fingers tangling in his hair. She kissed him with all the pent-up fear and adrenaline of the last 48 hours. Lorenzo swept a stack of files and a laptop off the desk with one arm, the crash lost under the sound of their breathing. He set her down on the polished wood. "You are beautiful," he murmured against her lips, his hands tracing the line of the silk dress. "God, Ava, you are everything." They moved together in a frenzy of longing, seeking comfort in the contact of skin on skin. It was a passionate affirmation of life in the face of the death that stalked them. Every touch was a promise. "I am here. I am yours." Later, when the room had quieted and the city lights painted stripes across the floor, they sat together on the leather chair, Ava resting against his chest. Lorenzo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have something else for you," he said. He opened it to reveal a delicate silver chain. Hanging from it was a tiny, intricate charm, a chestnut. It matched the black obsidian one he had given her, but this one was silver, bright and shining. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin at her nape. The cool metal settled against her collarbone. "The night," Lorenzo whispered near her ear. "Because you always find the unexpected move, because you jump over the walls they build." Ava touched the charm, her eyes filling with tears. I thought you would say queen." Lorenzo turned her to face him. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "You do not need a charm to tell you that. You are my queen now. Ava, that is a fact." She buried her face in his shoulder to hide the tears, overwhelmed by the absolute certainty in his voice. 2 days later, the illusion of safety shattered. Lorenzo had a meeting with the heads of the dockworker unions at the estate. Security was tight, but attention was focused on the front gates and the meeting room. Ava had been asked to stay upstairs, but the air conditioning was stifling. She told the guard outside her door, a young man named Leo, that she needed fresh air. They walked to the side garden, near the rose bushes where she and Lorenzo had walked that first night. Leo stood a respectable distance away, watching the perimeter. A delivery van pulled up to the service entrance 50 yards away. It was a regular delivery, catering supplies for the meeting. Leo glanced at it, checking his radio. In that split second of distraction, a shadow detached itself from the dense hedgeline behind Ava. It was Ray. He looked manic, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his good hand clutching a rag soaked in something chemical. He moved with the desperation of a man who had no other options. He lunged. Ava heard the crunch of gravel and spun around, but Ray was already on her. He clamped the rag over her face. The smell of chloroform was sickly sweet and overpowering, but Ava did not freeze. She held her breath. She dropped her weight, stomping hard on Ray's foot, the same move she had used in the alley, but with more force this time. Ray grunted but didn't let go. He dragged her backward toward a gap in the fence where the wire had been cut. "Leo!" Ava screamed, ripping the rag away from her mouth for a split second before Ray slammed a forearm into her throat. Leo turned, his hand going to his gun, but a second assailant popped up from the bushes and fired a silenced shot. Leo crumpled, clutching his shoulder. Ava was alone. She clawed at Ray's face, her nails digging into his eyes. She remembered Lorenzo's voice. "Use your elbows. Strike hard." She drove her elbow back into Ray's ribs. He wheezed, his grip loosening. Ava broke free, gasping for air, and scrambled backward. Ray pulled a knife. "You are coming with me, you little brat," he snarled, lunging at her. Ava grabbed a handful of garden gravel and threw it in his face. It was a desperate, messy move, but it blinded him for a second. She turned to run, screaming Lorenzo's name, and then Lorenzo was there. He had heard the shot, the scream. He came running from the terrace, clearing the stone steps in a single leap. He didn't have a weapon drawn. He didn't need one. He hit Ray like a freight train. Lorenzo tackled Ray to the ground, the knife skittering away into the grass. Lorenzo mounted him, his fists coming down with terrifying precision. There was no technique, only rage. He punched Ray in the jaw, the nose, and the ribs. The sound of breaking bones sickened the air. "I told you," Lorenzo roared, landing a blow that snapped Ray's head back. "I told you never to touch her." He grabbed Ray by the collar of his leather jacket and slammed his head against the earth. Ray was barely conscious, blood bubbling from his lips. Lorenzo raised his fist for a final, killing blow. "Lorenzo!" Ava screamed. She threw herself on his back, grabbing his arm. "Stop! You will kill him!" Lorenzo froze. His chest was heaving, his knuckles raw and bloody. He looked down at the broken man beneath him, then back at Ava. Her eyes were wide with terror, not of Ray, but of what Lorenzo was becoming in that moment. Lorenzo lowered his hand. He stood up, dragging Ray up with him by the throat. Ray hung limp, his feet dragging. Lorenzo leaned in close, his voice a low, demonic rumble. "Go back to Enzo. Tell him I saw his move. Tell him the game is over. And tell him if he ever looks at her again, I will burn his entire world to ash." He threw Ray toward the cut in the fence. "Run!" Ray stumbled, falling, crawling, and finally disappearing into the woods, sobbing. Lorenzo turned to Ava. The rage evaporated instantly, replaced by a frantic fear. He rushed to her, his bloody hands hovering, afraid to touch her. "Did he hurt you?" he demanded, scanning her for injuries. "Did he cut you?" Ava was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She looked at the blood on Lorenzo's hands. Ray's blood. She looked at Leo, who was being attended to by other guards rushing onto the scene. "I am okay," she whispered. "I fought him off." Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. He didn't care about the blood staining his suit or her dress. He just needed to feel her heart beating. "I am sorry," he rasped into her hair. "I should have been here. I should have known." Ava pulled back slightly, looking up at him. The violence had been horrifying, but the realization of what he had done, the sheer, unadulterated fury with which he had defended her, broke the last of her defenses. "I love you," she said. The words tumbled out, unplanned and raw. "Lorenzo, I love you." Lorenzo went still. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He raised a hand, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with his thumb, heedless of the blood on his knuckles. "You are already mine. Ava," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been mine since the first pawn moved." He kissed her forehead, a solemn seal of protection. As the sirens of approaching police cars, called by the neighbors, wailed in the distance, Lorenzo held her, staring out at the tree line where Ray had vanished. The opening game was over. The real war had just begun. The transition from the diner to the boardroom was not as jarring for Ava as one might expect. In the diner, she had managed chaos, tracking orders, timing distinct cooking durations, managing the volatile tempers of hungry truckers. In Lorenzo's world, the stakes were higher, but the logic remained the same: anticipate the bottleneck before it chokes the system. Lorenzo had begun to integrate her into the fold slowly. At first, it was just organizing his files, but soon, he let her sit in the corner of the library during low-level strategy meetings. The men, initially dismissive, learned to lower their voices when they saw the sharp, analytical gaze she fixed upon the maps spread across the mahogany table. It was a Tuesday evening, rain lashing against the bulletproof windows of the estate, when Ava spotted the pattern. Silvio and the Capos were arguing over a series of intercepted shipments. The Varelli family had been moving product through the city undetected, slipping past Lorenzo's lookouts like smoke. "They are using the sewers," one captain suggested. "Or paying off the cops." Ava stood up from her chair in the corner. She walked to the large map of Port Azure pinned to the wall. She traced a finger along a series of red pins marking the Varelli sightings. "They are not paying off the police," Ava said softly. The room went silent. Lorenzo turned in his chair, his eyes fixed on her. "Explain," he said. "Look at the drops," Ava said, her voice gaining strength. 4th Street, then 9th Avenue, then the warehouse on Pier 12. It looks random, but it is not. It is a night's tour." "A what?" Silvio asked, frowning. "A chess problem," Lorenzo answered for her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The knight moves in an L shape, 2 squares forward, 1 to the side." "Exactly," Ava nodded. "Varelli is avoiding the main thoroughfares by jumping jurisdictions. He moves 2 districts north, 1 district east. He's bypassing your blockades by using the cross streets that connect the zones, never driving in a straight line. She picked up a marker and drew a circle on a seemingly empty intersection in the industrial district. If the pattern holds, his next move must be here, the old textile factory. Lorenzo stood up. He looked at the map, then at Ava. Silvio, send a heavy crew to the textile factory. Tonight. Boss, that is a ghost town, Silvio protested. Do it, Lorenzo ordered. 4 hours later, the news came back. Lorenzo's men had intercepted the largest shipment of illegal firearms the city had seen in a decade. They had caught Varelli's lieutenants completely off guard. The victory was absolute, but in Port Azur, victory always came with attacks. 2 days later, a courier van idled outside Lorenzo's estate. The guards checked it, finding only a large wooden crate addressed to Lorenzo Marconi. When they pried it open in the driveway, the smell of iron and rot hit them instantly. Inside was the body of Marco, one of the young soldiers who had led the raid on the textile factory. Pinned to his chest was a note, "Pawns fell first." Lorenzo stood over the box, his face a mask of stone, but Ava saw the muscle in his jaw jumping. He turned away, storming into the house, his rage radiating off him like heat. Ava followed him into his study. He was pouring a drink, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back violence. "You need to pack," Lorenzo said, his back to her. "I'm sending you to a safe house in Zurich, tonight." "No," Ava said. Lorenzo slammed the glass down on the desk, shattering it. Amber liquid pooled on the wood. He spun around, his eyes wild. "Do not fight me on this, Ava. Marco is dead because he followed an order that came from your strategy. Enzo knows. He knows someone is helping me. You are not safe here." "I was never safe," Ava shouted back, stepping toward him rather than away. "I was not safe at the diner. I was not safe in my apartment. The only place I have ever felt safe is with you." "I cannot protect you from this," Lorenzo roared. "This is not a game. Men die. I cannot have your blood on my hands." "Then wash them," Ava said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. She reached out and took his bleeding hand cut by the glass in hers. "I am not a glass doll. Lorenzo, I am not a bystander anymore. I helped you strike them. I am part of this. I want to stand beside you, not behind you." Lorenzo looked down at her, at the determination in her eyes. He saw the same fire that had made her sacrifice her bishop to trap his king. She was willing to burn for him. The fight went out of him, replaced by a desperate, overwhelming need. "You are a fool," he whispered roughly, pulling her into him. "A beautiful, brilliant fool. I am yours," she replied. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of whiskey and grief. He lifted her onto the edge of the desk, ignoring the mess, his hands framing her face as if to memorize it. That night, in the sanctuary of his private study, with the storm raging outside and the fire dying in the hearth, they made love. It was not frantic or hurried. It was slow, trembling, and devout. Lorenzo worshipped her. He kissed the scar on her knee from a childhood fall. He kissed the bruises on her wrist that were finally fading to yellow. Ava held him, her fingers tracing the jagged line of an old bullet wound on his ribs. They moved together in the candlelight, a silent language of skin and breath. When he finally found his release, he buried his face in her neck, whispering her name like a prayer, terrified that it might be the last time he could say it. While Lorenzo and Ava found solace in each other, a different kind of confession was happening across the city. Ray Corgan lay in a hospital bed in a private clinic funded by the Varelli family. He was broken, jaw wired shut, ribs taped, legs in casts. Enzo Varelli stood at the foot of the bed, his face twisted in disgust. "Lorenzo let you live," Enzo said softly, "which means he wanted you to deliver a message, but you failed. Ray, you lost my shipment." Ray made a gurgling sound, panic in his eyes. He scribbled frantically on a notepad the nurse had left. He tore the page off and held it out with a shaking hand. Enzo took it. "It's the girl, the waitress. She's a chess genius. She plans the moves." Enzo read the note twice. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "The waitress," he mused. The one he is protecting. So, she is the brain. He crumpled the note. Well then, if we remove the brain, the beast will stumble. The trap was set 3 days later. Lorenzo received credible intel that Enzo was hiding out at a farmhouse 10 miles north of the city, preparing for a final strike. It was a classic setup, and Lorenzo knew it, but he could not ignore the chance to end the war. He took his best men. He took Silvio. He left the estate heavily guarded, with strict orders that Ava was to remain in the panic room until he returned. But Enzo had not gone north. As soon as Lorenzo's convoy was 5 miles out, a team of mercenaries breached the perimeter of the Marconi estate. They didn't come over the walls. They blew the main gate with military-grade explosives. The firefight was short and brutal. Lorenzo's guards fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Ava was in the study, reviewing the security feeds, when the screen went black. She heard the gunfire downstairs. She didn't scream. She didn't hide in the panic room. She knew they would drill it open. She needed to buy Lorenzo time. She needed to leave a message. She ran to the chessboard that sat on the coffee table, the game they had paused that morning. She grabbed the black queen. The door burst open. 2 men in tactical gear stormed in. Ava raised her chin, clutching the chess piece in her palm. "Ava Benton," one of them grunted. "Mr. Varelli would like a word." Lorenzo was 10 minutes from the farmhouse when his phone rang. It was the head of his home security, his voice gurgling through blood. "Boss, they took her." Lorenzo did not speak. He slammed on the brakes, spinning the car around in the middle of the highway, causing the convoy to screech to a halt. "Back," he screamed into the radio. "Get back to the estate." They drove like madmen, tearing through the city, but they were too late. The estate was smoking. Bodies of his loyal men lay on the gravel. Lorenzo sprinted into the house, his gun drawn, checking corners, calling her name. "Ava! Ava!" Silence answered him. He burst into the study. It was empty. The furniture was overturned, but on the coffee table, the chessboard remained miraculously untouched amidst the chaos. Lorenzo froze. He walked toward it. The pieces were exactly as they had left them, except for one, the Black Queen. Ava had moved it. She had placed it on a square right in the center of the board, a square that was undefended, directly in the line of fire of the White King. In chess, it was a move that signaled a desperate gambit, a sacrifice to draw the enemy out. She had given herself up. Lorenzo fell to his knees. A roar of pure, unadulterated fury tore from his throat, shaking the walls of the empty room. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "I will burn this city to the ground," he vowed to the empty room. "I will burn it all." Ava woke up to the smell of salt water and rust. Her head throbbed with a rhythm that matched the crashing of waves she could hear faintly in the distance. She was seated in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied painfully tight behind her back. A single industrial light bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, casting long, nauseating shadows. She was in a warehouse, cold, damp, and smelling of fish, the docks. "Wake up, Sleeping Beauty." Enzo Varelli stepped into the light. He was smaller than Lorenzo, but he carried himself with the twitchy energy of a hyena. He wore a pristine white suit that looked grotesque against the grime of the warehouse. "So," Enzo said, circling her, "this is the secret weapon, the chess prodigy." He laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "You are nothing but a scared little girl who seduced a monster." Ava lifted her head. Her lip was split, and her cheek throbbed where she had been struck during the kidnapping. "I did not seduce him," she rasped, "and he is not the monster here." Enzo stopped. He leaned in close, smelling of expensive cologne and decay. "He is a butcher. Darling, and you? You are the bait. I am going to break you. I am going to make you scream so loud that Lorenzo hears you from the other side of the city. And when he comes running, I will put a bullet in his head." He backhanded her across the face. Ava's head snapped to the side. The pain was blinding. But as the stars danced in her vision, she retreated. She closed her eyes and built the board in her mind. 64 squares, 32 pieces, white pawn to e4, black pawn to e5. She focused on logic, the cold, hard rules. Pain was just a variable. Fear was just a distraction. She had to stay sane. She had to be ready. Lorenzo was not driving blindly. He was in the back of an armored SUV, speeding toward the waterfront. On his laptop screen, a single red dot blinked on a map of the Docklands, the silver necklace, the night charm. He had installed the GPS chip the day he bought it. He had hoped never to use it, but he was a man who planned for every eventuality. "We are 2 minutes out," Silvio shouted from the front seat. He was loading a shotgun. "There are at least 20 heat signatures in the warehouse. Boss, it is a kill box." "Drive through the wall," Lorenzo said. He was checking the magazine of his handgun. His face was void of emotion, his eyes dead. He was no longer a man. He was a weapon. "Through the wall?" Silvio asked. "Through the wall?" Ava heard the engine roar before she saw the headlights. The metal wall of the warehouse exploded inward. Debris and dust filled the air as the armored SUV smashed through the corrugated steel, crushing crates and sending Enzo's men diving for cover. The car skidded to a halt in the center of the floor. The doors flew open. Hell broke loose. Lorenzo stepped out, firing before his feet hit the concrete. 2 of Enzo's guards dropped instantly. Silvio and the rest of the team poured out, providing covering fire. "Ava!" Lorenzo shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of gunfire. Enzo, recovering from the shock, grabbed Ava by the hair and hauled her up, pressing a gun to her temple. "Drop it, Marconi, or I paint the wall with her brains." The shooting stopped. Silence fell over the warehouse. Heavy and suffocating, Lorenzo stood 20 feet away. He was breathing hard, blood from a graze on his forehead dripping into his eye. He raised his hand slowly, his gun dangling from his finger. "Let her go." "Enzo," Lorenzo said, "this is between us. It ends with you on your knees." Enzo spat. "Kneel." Lorenzo looked at Ava. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but she gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The Queen's sacrifice. Lorenzo dropped to his knees. Enzo laughed, triumphant. "Look at you! The great Lorenzo Marconi, kneeling for a whore." Enzo shifted his aim, moving the gun from Ava's head to point at Lorenzo's chest. In that split second of transition, Ava moved. She didn't pull away. She dropped her dead weight, slamming her shoulder into Enzo's stomach. It wasn't enough to knock him down, but it was enough to throw off his aim. Enzo fired. The bullet took Lorenzo in the shoulder, spinning him around, but Lorenzo was already moving. He rolled, bringing his gun up with his good hand. Bang, bang. Enzo stiffened. 2 blooms of red appeared on his white suit, one in the chest, one in the throat. He looked at Lorenzo with a look of pure shock, then crumpled to the floor. The remaining Varelli men hesitated. Their boss was dead. "Leave!" Silvio roared, racking his shotgun. "Or die with him!" They ran. Lorenzo tried to stand, but his legs gave way. He collapsed onto the concrete. "Lorenzo!" Ava screamed. She struggled against her bonds until Silvio ran over and cut them with a knife. She scrambled across the floor, sliding into the blood that pooled around Lorenzo. She pulled his head into her lap. His shirt was soaked in red. He had taken a second bullet in the gut during the initial breach. "Lorenzo, look at me," she sobbed, pressing her hands over the wound in his stomach. "Stay with me." His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused. He reached up, his bloody hand trembling, and touched her face. "Check. Mate," he whispered. Then his hand fell. His eyes rolled back. "No." Ava screamed. She fumbled for the emergency button on the necklace he had given her, the backup signal. She held it down until the LED flashed red. Sirens were already wailing in the distance. The hospital waiting room was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and vending machine hums. Ava sat in a plastic chair, still wearing her torn, blood-stained dress. She refused to leave. She refused to wash the blood from her hands until she knew he was alive. Silvio sat across from her. He looked aged. His posture slumped. He flatlined twice in the ambulance. Silvio said quietly, "He will come back," Ava said. Her voice was hollow but certain. "He does not lose." A doctor emerged, looking exhausted. "Family of Mr. Marconi?" Ava stood up. "Me? I am his. I am with him. He is stable," the doctor said. It was close. One bullet missed the artery by a millimeter. He's in recovery. You can see him for a minute, but do not wake him." Ava walked into the room. Lorenzo lay pale and still against the white sheets, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped with a steady, reassuring rhythm. She walked to the bedside. She took his large, limp hand in hers. She kissed his knuckles, tasting the antiseptic and the lingering iron of the violence. "I am here," she whispered. "I am not going anywhere." The recovery was slow. Lorenzo was a terrible patient, demanding, restless, and angry at his own weakness. A week later, he was sitting up in bed, reviewing files. Ava walked in, carrying a chessboard. Silvio was with her. "You need rest," Ava scolded, taking the files from Lorenzo's hand. "I need to work," Lorenzo grumbled. "Silvio says the Varelli territories are in chaos. We need to move." "Silvio can handle it," Ava said. She set the board down on the rolling table. She looked at the consigliere. "Silvio, play me." Silvio blinked. "Excuse me, if I win," Ava said, "Lorenzo takes the rest of the week off, and you handle the acquisition of the Varelli assets. If you win, I will let him work." Lorenzo watched, amused, a smirk playing on his pale lips. "Careful, Silvio." Silvio sat down, his pride stung. "I have been playing for 40 years. Miss..." They played. It took 20 minutes. Ava dismantled Silvio's defense with surgical precision, trapping his king in a net of pawns. "Checkmate," Ava said softly. Silvio stared at the board. He looked at the position, realizing he had been herded into the trap 10 moves ago. He looked up at Ava, then at Lorenzo. He stood up and straightened his tie. "The lady is right, boss," Silvio said, a newfound respect in his tone. "You need rest. I will handle the territories. She clearly has the strategy under control." Lorenzo laughed, wincing as his stitches pulled. "I told you." 3 weeks later, Lorenzo was cleared to go home. The penthouse was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth. It was raining outside, but inside, it was safe. Ava stood by the window, looking out at the city. "Ray is gone," she said without turning around. "He is," Lorenzo said from the sofa. "He will not be found, and your loan." The bank records for Ray's organization had a tragic server error. All debts were erased. Ava turned. She walked over to him. She climbed into his lap, straddling his hips, careful of his healing wounds. She rested her forehead against his. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," Lorenzo said, his hands resting on her waist. "You saved yourself. I just evened the odds." He looked deep into her eyes, seeing the journey they had taken, from the shy waitress in the diner to the woman who had walked into a warehouse of killers to save him. "Ava," he said softly. He reached into his pocket. He did not pull out a ring box. He pulled out a chess piece. It was the Black Queen, the one she had left on the board, but he had had it modified. The base was now wrapped in a band of diamonds, glittering in the firelight. He pressed it into her palm. "I do not want a wife who stands behind me," Lorenzo said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want a partner. I want a queen who can play the game better than I can. Will you marry me?" Ava looked at the piece, then at him. Tears spilled over her lashes. She closed her fingers around the queen, holding it against her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Your move." Lorenzo smiled, and he kissed her. A kiss of promise, of power, and of a game that they would play together for the rest of their lives. Ava's fingers closed around the diamond-studded queen. The weight of the piece was a solid, tangible promise in her palm. "Yes," she had whispered, and the word had sealed their future. They planned the wedding in secret. It would not be a grand affair with hundreds of guests. That was a luxury their world did not afford. It would be quiet, private, and real, a ceremony for them, not for the city. But before they could have their peace, the war for Port Azure had to have its end. Enzo Varelli was dead, but his organization was a decapitated serpent, still writhing and venomous. His lieutenants had scattered, each grabbing for a piece of the fallen territory, turning the streets into a chaotic chessboard of shifting alliances and brutal, senseless violence. The truce Lorenzo had maintained for years was shattered. "They are fighting each other for scraps," Lorenzo said, standing over a map in the penthouse study. His wounds had healed, leaving angry red scars that Ava had kissed just that morning. But they will not stop until one of them is strong enough to challenge me for the crown. So, let them, Ava said, coming to stand beside him. She placed her hand on his. They are predictable. They are all pawns who think they are kings. They expect you to attack them one by one. They are ready for a war. What are you suggesting? Lorenzo asked, turning to her. Do not give them a war, Ava said, her eyes alight with the familiar fire of strategy. Give them a peace meeting. Lure them all to one place, at one time. They are greedy. They will come if they think they can claim a piece of their old master's territory. Lure them where? Lorenzo said, intrigued. Ava pointed to a spot on the map, a sprawling, dark patch of green north of the city. The old Vancroft mansion, it is abandoned. It is neutral territory. And, she smiled grimly, it only has 2 escape routes, the main road in and the old iron bridge over the ravine. The plan was set in motion. A message was sent through back channels, allegedly from a neutral party in the criminal underworld, inviting the 3 remaining Varelli lieutenants, a brute named Gallo, a smuggler named Bianchi, and a quiet psychopath named Fede, to a meeting. The purpose, to divide the Varelli assets and restore order. With Lorenzo Marconi's blessing, it was a blatant trap. But as Ava predicted, their greed and ego were stronger than their sense of self-preservation. Each man believed he could outsmart the other 2 and walk away with the prize. The night of the meeting, the Vancroft mansion was a tomb overgrown with ivy, its broken windows like empty eye sockets, staring into the fog rolling in from the river. Lorenzo was not there. He was a mile away, in a mobile command unit, watching feeds from drones hidden in the trees. Ava sat beside him, the glow of the monitors illuminating her face. Silvio was with them, coordinating the men on the ground. Gallo arrived first, with a dozen men. They stormed the house, checking for traps. Bianchi arrived second, his men taking the perimeter. Fede, the last, blocked the main road with his own vehicles. They were trapped, but they did not know it yet. They are all in the grand hall, Silvio reported, his voice tense. Now, Ava whispered. She had not planned a firefight. She had planned a psychological collapse. An anonymous tip, delivered 30 minutes earlier, had informed the Port Azure police of a massive gang-related arms deal and hostage situation at the mansion. A second, simultaneous tip from a different burner phone reported a credible bomb threat on the old iron bridge, the only other way out. They are arguing, Lorenzo observed, watching the grainy drone feed. Gallo thinks Bianchi set him up, and Bianchi thinks Fed is making a play, Ava murmured. They are playing a 3-man game. They do not know the real opponent is the board itself. The first shot was fired inside the house. It was impossible to know who started it, but it did not matter. The fragile truce shattered, and the mansion erupted in gunfire as the 3 factions turned on each other, just as Ava had said they would. They are breaking, Silvio said, watching men pour out of the house. They are running for the bridge. Gallo, Bianchi, and Fede. Their forces decimated, scrambled into their cars, and tore down the long driveway, heading for the bridge, the escape route. They arrived at the iron bridge to find a wall of flashing blue and red lights. The entire city police force and the tactical bomb squad had sealed it off. The lieutenants screeched to a halt, caught between the police in front of them and the sound of sirens now converging on the mansion from the main road. They were trapped, boxed in by the law. Checkmate, Ava said softly. Lorenzo looked at her. Her plan had been bloodless, at least. Not by his hands. She had used the city's own defenses to cure Varelli cancer. She had won the war without firing a shot. A single stray bullet from a panicking Varelli soldier fleeing into the woods pinged off the command unit. Lorenzo instinctively shoved Ava down, covering her with his body, and a bullet fragment from the ricochet grazed his forearm. "Lorenzo," she gasped. "It is nothing," he said, but he was reminded again of the price of their life. It is over. The rebuilding of the Marconi family was quiet. With the Varelli leadership either dead or in police custody, Lorenzo consolidated his power, absorbing territories not with violence, but with offers of stability. The city, tired of the chaos, was grateful for the peace. 3 months after the night at the mansion, Ava stood on a sidewalk in her old neighborhood. The Silver Spoon Diner had been rebuilt, but she was looking at the building next to it, a formerly boarded-up storefront. A new sign hung above the door, the Queen's Gambit Community Center. Inside, the room was bright. Dozens of chessboards were set up. Children from the neighborhood, kids who reminded her of herself, were bent over the boards, learning the game. Lorenzo stepped up behind her, placing his hands on her waist. Anonymous donors, he had told her when he gave her the deed. They look happy, Ava whispered, watching a small girl capture a knight. You gave them a way out, Lorenzo said. A different one. Their wedding was on a Thursday, in the rose garden of the estate. The only guests were Silvio, the head of Lorenzo's security, and the judge, who looked terrified but was paid well. Ava wore a simple white dress, her hair down. Lorenzo wore a dark suit, his eyes never leaving her. When the judge pronounced them married, Lorenzo did not kiss her. He held her face in his hands, his eyes tracing every line of her features as if seeing her for the first time. My wife, he said, the words thick with a reverence that stunned her. My husband, she replied, her voice shaking. He kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that sealed the promise. Later, at the small reception in the study, they shared their first dance by the firelight. No music playing except the sound of their breathing. Lorenzo held her close, his chin resting on her head. I invited you to play for fun, he whispered, his voice rough. Just a game to clear my head. Ava looked up at him, her arms wrapped around his neck. You changed my life instead, he finished. We changed each other, she said. The final scene of their story was not a grand finale. It was a quiet Tuesday night, a year later. The city was calm. The penthouse was peaceful. Ava sat across from Lorenzo at the small, worn chessboard they had first used in the diner. He had bought the diner, and when they tore it down to build a new community center, he had saved the booth and the board. The fire crackled. Wine sat poured in 2 glasses. Your move, Lorenzo said, smiling. They played. The game was slower now, more thoughtful. It was not a battle, it was a conversation. Ava saw a clear path to victory in 5 moves. She saw the trap he was walking into. She looked at his hand resting near the board, at the simple gold band on his ring finger. She looked at the faint scar on his forehead from the night he had rescued her. She moved her bishop, a seemingly random move that ignored the opening. A mistake. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. He saw the opening she had given him. He hesitated, then took it. He captured her rook. Ava smiled. 3 moves later, Lorenzo's king trapped her own. Checkmate, he said, his voice laced with a playful triumph he rarely allowed himself. Good game, Ava said, leaning forward. Lorenzo grinned. He knew. He reached across the board, his hand covering hers. You let me win. This time, Ava said, her smile matching his. The story closes on them kissing across the board, their hands entwined between the fallen kings and queens, a partnership forged in chaos and sealed in strategy, a king and his queen, perfectly and finally in check. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We have poured our hearts into bringing Ava and Lorenzo's world to life. We would love to know what you thought. Please comment below and tell us where you are listening from and what your favorite part of their journey was. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more content just like this. Your support means the world to us.